save the whole city. That sounds like it was an important profession, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's true. It was important. But at the same time, it was considered a low profession because people were superstitious. Back in the Middle Ages, they feared the night and the dark. People believed in all kinds of spooky things going on at night. And night watchman was with all this, with the dark element. And that's why it was considered a low profession. I know it's not logical for us now, but it was for people back then. For them, that all made sense. By the way, guess who were the two lowest professions? Who was on the very bottom of the social scale? Gravedigger, executioner. The hangman was the outcast, on the very bottom of the social scale. And the second lowest was the gravedigger. And they like to work together, these two. They had the same clients, with a short time difference. The third lowest was already me, that watchman and tower guards. And not to forget two more things. Night watchmen also were lamplights. They lightened street lamps in the evening when it went dark. And they had to check if the doors of the houses were all locked. That's what a night watchman did, all over Europe and all the cities, like here. And we had them here until 1920. Quite a long time. The real night watchman existed in Rothenburg. Doesn't mean I'm not real. It's my main job since more than 20 years, and everything's better now, I admit. Work time is much less, not all night, and pays better too. Thanks for coming. And it's not dangerous at all like it once was, because you all come with me. So I feel pretty safe tonight with all of you people. And after this intro, it's almost time to leave. Just one last remark. You know, there's a lot of history coming up in this hour about Rothenburg and the Middle Ages. You can never, ever keep all this in mind. And why should you? I put it on a DVD. I narrated it. It's playing an hour 15 plus a bonus track. It's the American system. And it's way more than the tour, it's the extended tour, including live scenes, acts and actresses, archive material, the right music, and show me telling all the stuff. I just wanted to let you know, it's available at the end for 15 euros. And now enough for the beginning. Are you ready to go? Yes. Then let's go. But when you look back where we started, you can see how the market square is surrounded by a lot of big houses. Some of them are from the 14th century. Jacob's Church by chance. It's more a cathedral than a church. All this talk means this was a rich city, and all the buildings that I mentioned still show the wealth Rothenburg once had. And there were three reasons why this was a rich place. Our main economy was textile business. These people here got thousands of sheep outside of the city walls, so they got tons of food. Every third of our craft, after bakers and butchers, was working in this kind of business. We were famous for our textile products. Reason number two was a lot of good land. 400 square kilometers of fertile land. 180 villages on this land. This all belonged to Rothenburg City, a wide territory with all kinds of food. And then the third reason, which were two important trade routes. One was coming from Prague to Paris, east-west, and the other one from Scandinavia down to Rome, Italy, north-south. Nowadays, that's the Autobahn A6 and A7, intersection about 20 miles west from here. But back in the old days, when they got the train, this intersection was just 300 yards outside of our main gate. And sure, that was perfect, because a lot of merchants, pilgrims, travelers, being that close, dropped in, spending time and money in our city. Like now, you do. It started early, with all these foreigners in town. And for all these reasons, this was a rich. There were 6,000 inhabitants in the 15th century. At this time, Rothenburg was one of the 20 biggest cities in the Holy Roman Empire of German nation. And we had a time of glory from 14th to 17th century. But then, all of a sudden, everything stopped. And this city fell asleep for 250 years. Nothing happened anymore. There was just poverty. Things were very extreme. In our history, it really went up and down. But I'll tell you later about the down. It's too early for the sad story. And you can also see lots of big houses right and left. The rich and noble people like to live here and around the market square. They were called patricians, the rich and noble families. And the biggest privately owned building in the whole city, it's right opposite. It's that one. And there's something special. Unfortunately blocked by this car. There are 4 chains with a handle left of the entrance. These were the doorbells, like people used to have them long ago. If one pulls them, the bells inside ring. But not anymore, because everybody tried. And the people who live there, they don't like them. They fix them. Interesting detail is, those who own the house and live inside are descendants of the noble family that moved in more than 300 years ago, in 1663, and they're still in there. Not the same people, but the same family, which is amazing, even here. And there's something else very typical, very obvious. All the big houses have it, like they have. I mean the wide gate. It had to be so wide that a carriage could drive into the courtyard. Imagine a big courtyard behind a big house. People got a barn and a stable there, animals and vegetables. A city in the old days was like a big village. Sure, it didn't look like one, but it smelled like one. And even worse, because there was a tannery and a skinnery in town. The stench coming from there was really outstanding. And the streets were out of dirt, no cobblestones. The animals were in the streets, in the daytime. Not only poultry, also goats and pigs. Thousands of animals doing their part, everywhere. And the people were throwing it out of the window. Everything. In the early morning, it was kind of dangerous. Walking the streets. Because after people got up, they emptied their chamber pots through the window into the street. And they were told to give a short warning before. So they would kind of fear. But seconds later it happened. And it's kind of tricky too. Because when somebody shouts down, people in the street look up. And it was all in the streets, all that dirt and crap. Just one idea to get rid of it. They used to have a gutter industry. Twice a week, everyone had to sweep the dirt laying in front of his house into that gutter. Then they hoped for next rain to come and wash it down here, in the moat or in the valley. But that was more a hope than a good idea. It didn't really work. In July, August, when it was hot and dry, nothing went down here. But it stank so hard that all the rich people who could afford having a solid house on the countryside went out of town. It wasn't romantic at all. In the summer, in the city. And because of all the dirt in the streets and the stored food in the houses, there were all these rats. And what happened because of the rats? Plague, bubonic plague. It was a special kind of flea living on rats. The flea got this bacteria, killing all these millions of people. And the hardest part was, no matter where or when it hit, once people got the plague and died, there was no priest showing up to give them last rites. Not because they refused to go or they were too scared. It was vice versa. They were amongst the first victims because they went. But it was contagious. And there weren't that many priests in the city. Pretty soon they were all gone. That meant for all the others, no last rites. And I meant going where? To hell. Direct. And you must consider people were so religious. Their only common goal, no matter if rich or poor, was to make it up into heaven. Nothing was more important than it. Once people had money, they bought letters of indulgence. When they were poor, they were praying like crazy. Everybody tried what he could to make it up there, into heaven. And then the plague came in between and ruined it all. And all their hopes were gone. People were convinced, now hell is next for eternity. That's how they died. And you know, this dimension of fear that these people had, we cannot imagine, rational as we are nowadays, about this kind of thing. Besides plague, there were other diseases. Sure, there was hunger and poverty. People could die from simple infections like bad teeth or a cold. Life expectancy was low. Well, I don't want to make everything negative. There might have been also some positive aspects of life. But I don't know any. So my conclusion is, and I think you agree, there were no good old days. No. Right?
Turn that off.
Okay. I think it came from there. Now, before we walk through this gate, I want to tell you something about it. It's one of the 6 gates of Rothenburg. It was the safest one. No enemy could come up from there. There's just a park and a cliff coming. We'll see that pretty soon once we get outside. Safest gate and the oldest one as well. It's from 1360. The gate, the tower, the whole construction. And there's something else special. Once we get in there, you will see that in the first big door coming up is a small door cut into the big one. They called it a manhole. And they called it so because when the gatekeepers opened it, the hole was just big enough for one man to fit through That's why manhole. Makes sense, doesn't it? It was in every city on every gate, always for the same use. It was for residents who made a certain kind of mistake. Guess which? That's right. Staying out too late, missing curfew. It was last chance for latecomers. You know, it was too dangerous to open a big gate at night. Why should a whole city get in danger for a latecomer? The danger was an enemy could have tried to get in the same moment when the big gate was open just for a minute. It didn't need a lot of enemy to destroy a city. A few of them were enough. The only thing they had to do was to start a fire, burn it down. There was a permanent threat. People had to think about security all the time, and sure they did. Every evening, with beginning of darkness, all the bells were rung from all the clock towers to inform everyone who was still outside to get back in. The bells gave the signal. People knew when it was time to hurry home. They had an hour to make it. If they missed it, they had a problem. Because all the big gates were shut for security reasons. Last chance then getting in was through the manhole. But it was expensive to use it. The gatekeepers asked for a fine. Because without a fine, everybody would have been late. Every 5 minutes, people would have knocked at that door all night through. But once it's expensive, it's different. The fine educated people to be back in time. And that was the long story of the small manhole. Now let's go and have a look at it. Isn't that a great view? Oh, can you see it at all? There's the southern end of Rothenburg. And when you look down, which is in this direction, we're on the edge of a cliff. If you can't see it, just believe me. It's going down like 60 yards. And we have this cliff on 3 sides around the city. No enemy tried to get up there. Only by one side, there was a chance for an attack. And that's where the high wall is, with the ramparts. There all the people were standing on a high position on the wall, shooting down on all this enemy. Our main enemy were the neighbor cities, the Bishop of Würzburg and the Count of Nuremberg, to mention just the worst two, because they tried it so often, but they never made it. Not this too, and not all the other enemy we had. This city wasn't taken until the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. And there's one detail you should know. We got the city rights 1172. And Rothenburg was conquered first time in 1631. Not bad. But then it happened in only 3 days, and it was changing everything. The one who did it was General Tilly, leader of the Imperial Catholic Army in that war. And he was pretty close to Rothenburg, end of October 1631, with an army of 40,000 men. And they were just passing by from east to west. They were not interested in this city. They had other plans. But something came in between that stopped them on their way, that stopped 40,000 people. Guess what besides the Oktoberfest?
Rain.
Rain, that's it. It was raining cats and dogs for a whole week. And you can maybe imagine what kind of streets people got back in those days. It was all mud. And his troops got hundreds of carriages, wagons, cannons. They made no miles anymore. They got stuck in the dirt running out of food. All these people were hungry and freezing. because after the rain it got cold. So there was a huge army in a desolate situation. They had to have a winter quarter, a dry place to stay, enough to eat. And the general decided that they will have a winter quarter in the next city. Unfortunately, he picked us, sending a mounted messenger to inform us that this is going to happen, that they are on their way to us, and we should be ready when they arrive. Have everything organized for them. Open the gates, let them in, and supply them for the winter. This was a bad news. We were 6,000 and they were 40,000. We were Protestants and they were Catholics. And it was a religious war. At least the first half of it. Later they forgot what it started. Plus they were not nice guests. Not soldiers, but mercenaries. The only thing they wanted was plunder and steal. Take all our goods and things, our wives and daughters. And we should let them in without fighting? And let them do all this? No way. These were brave people. And the city senate of Rothenburg decided that it's better to stand up and fight and hold the city. And we dared to. And I have to tell you, that didn't work. It was a short battle, because as weak as the enemy were, they got a lot of big cannons. Once they realized that we won't let them in, they were shooting from a distance against our walls. And we were shooting back on them once they were close enough. But on the third day of the attack, we ran out of gunpowder. There were just a few barrels of gunpowder left, all stored in the powder tower, which was one of these towers along the wall, a part of the fortifications, and a pitch-dark room inside, like towers usually are. And then something very stupid happened. It's hard to talk about. One of our own people made this huge mistake. It was the guy who was in charge of the gunpowder, making sure that no unauthorized person gets access to it. But for some reason, he himself went in there, but with a torchlight. Maybe because it was so dark in there. Or maybe he just forgot what kind of tower it was. You know, later on, we couldn't ask him what the hell he had done. But the result was impressive. He blew it up. There were some heavy explosions, a gap in the wall, right where the main attack was. Now we surrendered immediately. Hoping for mercy, we opened the gates and they came in. But there was no mercy. We had killed more than 300 of them during the attack, while we had lost just 2 people so far. One was the guy with the torch, and the other one was standing too close. Shit happens. And then these troops were here for 3 months, not only in the city, also out in the villages, killing hundreds of our people, bringing diseases in. And for sure, Rothenburg was plundered, empty, nothing left of value. But they didn't burn it last. After 3 months, they went, and Rothenburg still stood. And people here tried to recover from this, but they couldn't, because the war continued another 17 years. And without going into any further details, when this terrible war was finally over in 1648, this was a poor, forgotten place. We had lost more than half of our people. What our craftsmen produced was not enough for any export. And the 2 trade routes that I mentioned in the beginning, that were so important over centuries, now, after the big war, they were unimportant. There were new trade routes now, but they didn't come any more close to Rothenburg. Here, time stood still. For 250 years, nothing happened. People had no money to modernize their city. And that's the only reason why it's so well preserved. It was preserved by poverty. And the wealth of today bases on poverty of yesterday. We just had to wait long enough until tourism started. It took forever. And we didn't know it's coming. But then finally, 1890, the first visitors were showing up. And they loved this place. And they talked about it to other people.